In the blood-soaked dust of the Arizona Territory, a feud between the settlers and the Apache is written in bullets and graves. When Chief Nakai, the most feared warrior of the Chiricahua, finds his only daughter dying from a sickness his medicine men cannot cure, he becomes a desperate father. But when he bursts into his wickiup, he finds the last person on earth he ever expected. A white woman, alone, her hand on his daughter's head. He draws his knife for the killing blow. But what he sees next freezes the blood in his veins, shattering everything he thought he knew about his enemy, his past, and the very nature of survival. The wind that scoured the Dragoon Mountains carried no relief. It was a dry, rasping breath that tasted of dust and despair, weaving through the thorny arms of Ocotillo and rattling the hides of the hidden wickiups. Inside the largest of these, Chief Nakai of the Chiricahua Apache watched his daughter burn. Her name was Talia, meaning morning dew, but the dew had long since evaporated. She was 8 summers old, and for 10 days a fever had been consuming her from within. Her small body, usually so full of wiry energy, was limp on the rabbit fur pallets. Her breathing was shallow, a tiny pained whistle that sawed at Nakai's soul with every rise and fall. He was a man built of the mountains themselves, hard angles, deep shadows, and an unyielding core. His face was a map of conflicts, his eyes holding the flat, dangerous patience of a predator. He was a chief, a leader of the Badankohi people, a man who had faced cavalry charges and the calculating lies of agents from the San Carlos Reservation. He had defied General Crook, the Gray Wolf, and had kept his small band free. But in this cramped, smoky space, he was not a chief. He was a father, and he was failing. The spirits are silent, the old D-In, or medicine man, had whispered to him that morning, his own eyes clouded with failure. The chants had been sung. The sacred pollen had been sprinkled. The sweat lodge had been fired until the rocks cracked. Nothing. The sickness, which the Pindalikai, the white eyes, called the lung fever, held its grip. Nakai's wife, Talia's mother, had been taken by a similar fever 3 winters ago. The thought of losing Talia, the last piece of his heart, the last echo of his wife's laugh, was a void threatening to swallow him. It was a weakness he could not afford. A shadow fell across the entrance of the wickiup. It was Kyle. Kyle was Nakai's most trusted warrior, but he was a man forged in a different fire. Where Nakai was granite, Kyle was obsidian, sharp, brittle, and quick to draw blood. He saw the world in 2 colors, Apache and enemy. "The scouts return," Kale said, his voice a low growl. He did not look at the sick child. He looked at his chief. "The Pindalikai have moved cattle into the lower canyon. They are close, too close." "Let them," Nakai murmured, his gaze fixed on Talia's face. "They foul the water," Kale pressed. "They drive away the deer. We have no meat. The children grow thin. And this sickness," Kale gestured vaguely toward the child, "it is a white man's disease. It comes with them. We must cleanse the land." Nakai knew what Kale was asking for. A raid, blood, war. It was the only answer Kale ever had. "War will not fill our bellies," Nakai said, his voice flat. "It will only bring the Inda, the soldiers from Fort Bowie. They will swarm this canyon like red ants." "Then we die as warriors," Kale hissed. "Not as starving dogs in a hidden hole. Look at your daughter, Nakai. Your grief makes you weak. The Pindalikai, Thorn, and his ranchers, they are the poison. We must cut it out." The name Thorn struck a nerve. Elias Thorn, a rancher whose homestead sat squarely on what had once been Apache wintering grounds. Thorne had lost his own family in a raid years prior, a raid, Nakai knew, that had been led by Mescalero, not his own band. But to men like Thorne, all Apache were the same. Thorne hunted them with a religious fury. Nakai rose to his full height, the shadows in the wickiup clinging to his broad shoulders. The air crackled with the friction of two powerful wills. I am still Chief Kale, and I say we do not trade the lives of our warriors for a few stolen cattle. Not yet. Kale's eyes narrowed. And the girl? Nakai's face became an unreadable mask. I will go to the high bluffs. The Diyin spoke of a root that grows only where the eagles nest, the sky flower. I will find it. Kale sneered. You hunt for a flower while your people starve and your enemy sharpens his knife. I hunt for a cure, Nakai snapped, his control finally breaking. You will stay. You will guard this camp. You will not engage the ranchers. That is my command. Kale held his chief's gaze for a long, insubordinate moment before dipping his head. As the chief commands. He backed out of the wickiup, disappearing into the harsh sunlight. Nakai turned back to his daughter. He touched her forehead, recoiling from the heat. The sky flower was a desperate hope, a story told by grandmothers. But it was all he had left. He placed his wife's turquoise pendant in Talia's small hand and motioned for an old woman, Tiza, to sit by the girl. Watch her, he ordered. Then, grabbing his rifle and his knife, Chief Nakai slipped out of the camp and began the treacherous climb. A desperate man scaling a mountain of grief, leaving his daughter and his camp vulnerable below. Elizabeth Stanton dragged a damp cloth across her forehead, pushing back a strand of sweat-soaked auburn hair. Her small cabin, nestled in a fold of the foothills, felt like an oven. It was a lonely place, a place defined by loss. Her husband, Dr. John Stanton, had been dead for 6 months. He had been a man of quiet, stubborn decency, a physician from Boston who had come west not for gold, but because he believed people needed healing, no matter who they were. His death, a simple, stupid accident involving a spooked horse and a rocky creek bed, had left Elizabeth in a perilous position. She was a white woman, but she was not of the other settlers. The local ranchers, led by the bitter and influential Elias Thorne, viewed her with suspicion. John had been known to treat anyone. A broken-armed miner, a settler's child with croup, and, on more than one occasion, an Apache warrior who had appeared at their cabin in the dead of night, wounded and silent. John had believed in the Hippocratic Oath. Elias Thorne believed in extermination. Since John's death, Thorne had made his position clear. This ain't no place for a woman alone, Mrs. Stanton, he'd said, his eyes cold, especially not one known to be charitable to the hostiles. You'd be wise to sell this land to me and take the stage back east. Elizabeth had refused. This cabin, this land, was all she had left of John. And, in a way she could never explain to Thorne, it was all she had left of herself. She was packing what remained of her husband's medical supplies: quinine for the fevers, carbolic acid for cleaning wounds, laudanum for pain. She was taking inventory when a shadow crossed her open door. She spun, her hand reaching for the shotgun she kept loaded by the hearth. It was not Thorne. It was a young Apache boy, no older than 12. He was thin, dressed in a tattered breechcloth, and his eyes were wide with fear. He stood 30 yards from her door, just at the edge of the scrub. He was from Nakai's band. She knew it. They were the last free Chiricahua in these mountains, and they were shadows. To see one in daylight, this close to a white dwelling, meant desperation. The boy, named Goso, had been here before. John had set his broken arm 2 winters ago, a secret kindness that had established a fragile, unspoken understanding. "Mrs. Stanton," the boy whispered, his English halting. "The doctor." Elizabeth's heart clenched. "The doctor is gone, Goso. He is dead." The boy's face fell, a mask of utter despair. He looked back up the ridge, then back to her. "The girl," he said, "the chief's girl, Talia, she burns. The Dean, no good." He didn't need to say more. Elizabeth understood. The lung fever. It had swept through the settlements last winter, and John had fought it day and night. "Goso, I am not a doctor," she said, her voice soft. You helped him," the boy pleaded. "You know the white medicine. Please." Elizabeth looked at the mountains, their jagged peaks tearing at the blue sky. This was madness. Nakai was a name that settlers whispered in fear. He was a ghost who left death in his wake. To walk into his hidden camp was suicide. Cale, his lieutenant, was known to kill on sight. And Elias Thorne had riders patrolling the foothills. If she was seen going to the Apache, she would be branded a traitor, and her life would be forfeit. She looked back at her husband's black leather bag. Heal them. It was all he had ever wanted to do. She looked at the boy. "The sickness? It takes the breath?" Goso nodded frantically. "She burns, like fire. 10 days. 10 days. Elizabeth knew what that meant. The crisis was near. The girl would either break the fever tonight, or she would die. "I have quinine," she murmured to herself, "and willow bark. John always said." She made a decision. It wasn't a choice, really. It was an inevitability, a pull she couldn't fight. "Go," she told Goso. "Tell no one, not Cale, no one. I will come. But I must come alone, and I must come unseen. Leave a sign at the split rock." The boy vanished, melting back into the chaparral as if he were never there. Elizabeth's hands moved with practiced speed. She packed the quinine powders, a bottle of laudanum, clean bandages, and a small jar of her husband's strongest salve. Then she paused. She went to a small wooden chest by her bed and took out a second, smaller leather pouch. This one was old, the hide worn smooth. Inside were dried herbs, osha root, bear clover, and sacred hash pollen, things an Apache Dean would know, things a white doctor would not. She secured the large bag on her back and tied the small pouch to her belt. She did not take her horse. It would be too easy to track. As the sun began to bleed into the western horizon, bathing the world in shades of orange and blood, Elizabeth Stanton slipped out of her cabin and began the perilous, desperate climb toward the shadows of the Dragoon Mountains, walking toward the camp of the man who would sooner kill her than look at her. Nakai returned as twilight painted the canyons in deep, bruised purple. He was empty-handed. The high bluffs had been barren. The sky flower was a myth, a desperate hope that had cost him a precious day. His legs burned from the climb, but it was the cold stone of failure in his gut that weighed him down. As he neared the hidden entrance to his camp, an unnatural quiet met him. The usual sounds, a dog's bark, the low murmur of voices, the cry of a child, were absent. There was only the wind. A cold dread, sharper than any cavalry blade, pierced his chest. Talia. He moved from a walk to a lope, his moccasins making no sound on the rocky earth. He passed the sentry spot. It was empty. He saw 2 of his warriors, including Cale, huddled near the far edge of the camp, their backs to him, peering down the canyon. They were watching something, distracted. Rage, pure and hot, flooded his veins. They were supposed to be guarding the camp. He ignored them. He strode directly to his wickiup. The hide flap was drawn. He paused, listening. He heard a sound, a low, soft murmur. It was not the voice of Titsa, the old woman. It was a language he did not recognize, but the tone, it was a lullaby. And beneath it, he heard a sound he had not heard in days. A weak, faint sigh from Talia. Not a gasp of pain, but a breath. He ripped the hide flap aside and burst into the wickiup. His mind, sharpened by a lifetime of war, took in the scene in a fraction of a second. Tisa, the old woman, was slumped in the corner, her mouth gagged with a strip of cloth. She was bound, but unharmed. And kneeling beside his daughter's pallet was a Pindalikai, a white woman. Her back was to him. She had auburn hair, pulled back in a practical bun, though strands of it had escaped to frame her face. She was bathing Talia's forehead with a wet cloth, the one he had left. His daughter, who had been unconscious when he left, was awake. Her eyes were barely open, but she was looking at the woman. He saw the open black bag, a doctor's bag. He saw a small, strange-smelling powder dissolved in a cup of water. Poison. The word screamed in his mind. This was a White Eyes trick, a new kind of warfare. She had snuck in, poisoned his daughter, and was now comforting her? His knife was in his hand before he was fully inside. He crossed the small space in one silent, lethal bound, grabbing the woman by her hair and yanking her backward. He pressed the cold steel of his blade against her throat. "You have killed her," he snarled, his voice a low vibration of pure fury. Elizabeth gasped, the cloth dropping from her hand. She stared up at the terrifying visage of the Apache chief, his face painted by the shadows of the dying fire, his eyes burning with a hatred that was absolute. But she did not scream. She did not plead. She looked from his face to the knife, and then to the child. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I am helping her." "Liar!" Nakai spat, pressing the blade harder. A thin line of blood welled on her skin. "You come here. You poison my child." "It is not poison," she cried out. "It is quinine. It is medicine for the fever. Look at her." Nakai's gaze flickered to Talia. The girl's eyes were still open, and she was watching them. Her breathing, which had been a ragged whistle, was still shallow, but the desperate sawing edge was gone. "She burns," Nakai growled, his mind reeling in confusion. "You, Tisa?" "She would not let me near the girl," Elizabeth said, the words tumbling out. I had to tie her. I did not harm her. Please, the girl, she has the white fever. I have seen it. The quinine will break it." The commotion had finally alerted the warriors outside. The flap was ripped open again, and Kale burst in, followed by 2 other men. Kale saw the scene, his chief holding a white woman at knife point, the bound Tisa, the sick child, and a look of grim triumph crossed his face. "I knew it," Kale roared. "A spy. She comes to poison the chief's daughter. Kill her, Nakai. Let me gut her. She is the one who has brought the sickness." "No!" Elizabeth yelled, finding a desperate strength. She looked past Kale, her eyes locking only with Nakai's, and then she did the impossible. She spoke, not in English, but in perfect, unaccented Chiricahua Apache. "Shichei, my chief," she said, the familiar words a shocking blow against the tense air. "Nde be, the people's, medicine is strong, but this is the white sickness. It requires a white cure. I bring it not for war, but for the child." The wickiup fell into a profound, suffocating silence. Kyle and the other warriors stared, their mouths agape. Nakai's hand, the hand that had held his knife steady through battles and ambushes, began to tremble. His mind could not process what his ears had just heard. A white woman, speaking the tongue. Not the broken, stumbling words of a fort translator or an agent, but the smooth, correct dialect of his own mother. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The shock was so profound it was physical, a jolt that ran from his skull to his feet. He loosened his grip on her hair, but the knife remained at her throat. "Who are you?" he whispered, the question in his own language. "My name is Elizabeth Stanton," she replied, still in Apache. "I am the widow of Dr. John Stanton." Nakai's memory flashed. Goso, the broken arm, the white doctor who had not asked for payment, who had not sent for the soldiers. "The doctor is dead," Nakai stated. "He is," Elizabeth said, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "But his medicine is not. I came to help his daughter." She looked at Talia. "I came to help Talia." The sound of his daughter's name, spoken in her own tongue by this impossible stranger, was the second shock. Cale recovered first. "A trick," he spat. "She is a witch. She learned the words from a prisoner. She uses our own tongue to poison us. She is an associate of Thorn. I saw his riders at the canyon mouth." At the mention of Thorn, the other warriors tensed. Nakai realized why they had been distracted. The camp was not just sick, it was about to be under siege. "Kill her," Cale insisted, raising his own rifle. "She is the scout that led them here." "No," Elizabeth gasped. "I came alone. I swear it on my husband's grave." Nakai was trapped. His warrior instinct screamed that Cale was right. This woman was a threat, an anomaly that could not be trusted. The presence of Thorn's men was damning. But his father's instinct saw his daughter, who had just swallowed a mouthful of the white medicine and whose eyes were now tracking her father in the room. He looked back at the woman. The fear in her eyes was real, but beneath it was something else, a stubbornness, a familiarity. "You speak the tongue," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where?" Elizabeth hesitated, her eyes flickering. This was the secret she had guarded her whole life. I learned it from a friend." "Liar," Cale lunged, but Nakai threw out an arm, stopping him. "You will not kill her," Nakai ordered. Cale stared at him in disbelief. "She is Pindalikai." "She is something else," Nakai said, his mind racing. He was the chief. He had to make a decision. "She is in my wiki-up. She is my prisoner. But she is also the girl's hope." He made a proclamation, his voice ringing with the authority that Cale had questioned. "She will stay. She will tend to Talia. If my daughter lives, this woman will be given safe passage back to her lands. But if Talia dies..." He pressed the knife back against Elizabeth's throat, just enough to break the skin. "She will die with her, before her." He then looked at Cale. "And you will go to the ridge. You will watch Elias Thorn. You will not engage. You will report. Now go." Cale, seething with a rage that was directed as much at Nakai as at the woman, turned and stormed out of the wiki-up. Nakai released Elizabeth, shoving her back toward the pallet. She stumbled, catching herself, and immediately turned her attention back to Talia, her hands shaking as she soaked the cloth in the cool water again. Nakai watched her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and a terrifying, unwelcome spark of hope. The shock of her words lingered, an impossible riddle. Who was this white woman who spoke like an Apache? For the next several hours, An agonizing truce held the wiki up. Nakai sat cross-legged by the entrance, his knife in his lap, his rifle at his side. He was a statue of coiled tension, his gaze fixed on the white woman. He watched her every move. Elizabeth worked with a desperate, focused energy. She forced more of the bitter quinine-laced water between Talia's lips, a few drops at a time. She bathed the child's face and wrists, murmuring words Nakai couldn't catch. Sometimes English, sometimes Apache. The fever held. Talia's skin remained frighteningly hot, her body trembling with slight, agonizing shivers. The medicine was not working, or at least not yet. Nakai felt the walls of his resolve crumbling. Coyle's words echoed in his head. A witch. A trick. He had staked his daughter's life on the word of an enemy. The air grew thick and close. Tidza, now untied, huddled in the far corner, chanting a low, fearful prayer, her eyes darting between her chief and the stranger. "It is not enough," Elizabeth finally whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. Nakai's hand tightened on his knife. "What?" "The quinine," she said, turning to face him. The dim light of the small fire cast strange, dancing shadows on her face. "It fights the fever, but the sickness is in her lungs. It is too strong. She needs more." "You have no more," Nakai stated. "Your white medicine has failed." "My white medicine has," Elizabeth agreed, and the confirmation startled him. She reached for the second, smaller pouch on her belt, the worn leather one. Nakai tensed, watching as she opened it. The scent of osha and dried herbs filled the small space. It was a familiar smell, a smell from his own childhood. "The Dien used hash root," she said, her voice soft, speaking in Apache again. "It is good, but it is not enough for the lungs." The cough. "It needs chill, bear clover, and the traveler's root to cleanse the blood." Nakai stared at her. These were not common remedies. These were specific herbs, used by the Betancohe medicine men for the deep lung sickness. How could she know this? "You are not Apache," he said, the words an accusation. "No," Elizabeth whispered, her eyes filling with tears, a deep, old sorrow that had nothing to do with her current predicament. "I am not." She pulled something from the pouch. It wasn't an herb. It was a small, crudely made object, a rawhide doll, no bigger than her hand. It was stitched with faded blue beads, in a distinctive crosshatch pattern. Nakai stopped breathing. His vision blurred, the wiki-up dissolving. He was no longer a chief. He was a boy of 6, sitting by a winter fire, watching his mother stitch that exact pattern onto his new moccasins. It was her mark. No one else used it. She had died when he was 10. His hand, the one not holding the knife, reached out, trembling. He did not ask. He took the doll from her. He turned it over in his calloused palm. It was real. The smell of the smoked hide, the feel of the small, uneven beads. It was a piece of his own soul, held in the hand of his enemy. "Where?" he demanded, his voice a broken thing. "Did you get this?" Elizabeth looked at the doll, and her carefully constructed dam of composure finally broke. A tear traced a path of clean skin through the grime on her cheek. "She gave it to me," she whispered. "Your mother. Ishkene. She gave it to me when they brought me back." Nakai's mind collapsed. Ishkene. Little bird. It was a child's name, a name he had not heard in 30 years. We were children," Elizabeth said, the memories flooding her. "I was not Elizabeth. I was a girl from a burned-out wagon, a raid. The mescalero took me. They traded me to your band. Nakai remembered. A white-haired, blue-eyed child, found half-starved. She had been 5, maybe 6. His mother, whose own daughter had died, had taken the girl in. They had named her Ishkene because she was so small and pale. She had been his sister, for 2 winters. You, he breathed, unable to form the words. I was Naline, she corrected, using the name his mother had actually given her. Bluebird. They called me Ishkene as a joke, but your mother called me Naline. She pointed a shaking finger at his own chest, at the turquoise pendant that hung there. That was hers. She gave it to your wife. But this, she touched the doll. This she gave to me. Nakai looked from the doll to her face. He saw it now. The ghost of the white-haired child inside the features of the auburn-haired woman. The eyes. They were the same. The soldiers, Nakai whispered, remembering the blackest day of his childhood. They came from Fort Sumner. A rescue. They said we were holding a white child captive. We tried to hide you. I remember. Elizabeth wept. I hid in the grain baskets. But they found me. They took me. I screened for your mother. They put me in a school. They gave me the name Elizabeth. They told me I was white. They told me you were savages. The third and final shock landed. It was not just that she was helping. It was not just that she spoke the tongue. It was that she was family. She was the lost one. The sister he had been forced to forget, stolen by the Inda and raised to be his enemy. And she had returned. Not as a warrior, not as a spy, but as a healer, bringing her 2 worlds together in a desperate attempt to save the last of his blood. You married the doctor, he said, trying to piece the world back together. He was a good man, she said. He did not hate. Like me, he was caught between. When I heard Goso say Talia, I knew. I knew it was your daughter. I still have the dreams, Nakai. I still speak the language in my sleep. Before Nakai could process this revelation, the wiki-up flap was torn open again. It was Kale, his face a mask of fury and fear. Thorn! He yelled, panic in his voice for the first time. He is not just watching. He is moving, his whole posse. They are coming up the canyon. They found the lower trail. Kale's eyes fell on the scene. The chief, his knife lowered. The woman, weeping. The doll in Nakai's hand. The intimacy and confusion of the moment enraged him. You see, Kyle bellowed, she has bewitched him. While she distracts our chief with her lies, her people come to slaughter us. To arms, to arms. We must fight. The camp erupted. The cries of Thorn and Inda, mistakenly as the ranchers were not soldiers, echoed off the canyon walls. Warriors scrambled for rifles. Women grabbed their children and fled for the high caves, and the fragile piece of the wiki-up was shattered. Kyle glared at Nakai. You have doomed us. Your weakness for this witch. Silence, Nakai roared, snapping back to the present. The shock of Elizabeth's identity had to be shelved. The immediate threat was real. He was a chief again. He grabbed Elizabeth by the arm, his grip like a steel trap. Is this your doing? He demanded, his eyes searching hers for the slightest hint of betrayal. No, I swear, she cried. Nakai, I swear on our mother's memory. I came alone. Thorn, he hates me. He must have tracked me. He thinks I am a traitor or a captive. Nakai believed her. The mention of their mother sealed it. He shoved her back toward Talia. Stay with the girl. He turned to Kale. You are a fool. You panic like a child. You think Thorn is the only threat? The sickness is the other. We fight two enemies tonight. He stepped out of the wickiup into the chaotic twilight. His warriors looked to him, their faces desperate for direction. Kale! Nakai shouted, his voice a battlefield command that cut through the noise. Take 5 men. Go to the high pass. You will not engage. You will rain rocks down on them. Slow them. Do not let them reach the flat land. Buy us time. And you? Kale challenged. I will defend the camp. And my daughter. Kale, hungry for a fight, any fight, grunted in agreement and vanished with his best men. Nakai organized the remaining warriors, a mix of old men and young boys, into a defensive perimeter around the cluster of wickiups. The situation was grim. They were outnumbered 3-1, and Thorn's men were experienced Indian fighters. He returned to the wickiup. The air inside was thick with the smell of herbs and fear. Talia was coughing, a dry, racking sound that tore at Elizabeth's heart. The fever is not breaking, Elizabeth said, her voice frantic. She was crushing the herbs from her pouch with a stone, mixing them with water. The quinine holds the fire, but the lungs. Nakai, the cheel, I have. It's old. It's lost its strength. It's not working. There is no more, Nakai said, checking his rifle. There is, she said, grabbing his arm. He was stunned by the strength in her grip. I saw it. On the way up. It grows in the lower canyon, by the spring. Where Thorn's men are coming. Nakai stared at her. That is suicide. It is her only chance, Elizabeth insisted. The chill guy, white bear clover, that grows by the water, it is the strongest. You know this. The Diyin know this. Without it, she will not last the night. The fever will break, but her lungs will fill. She will drown. Nakai was trapped in an impossible choice. Defend his people from the Pindalakai, who were attacking his home, or abandon his post to fetch a simple weed in the dark, on the word of a woman who was, and was not, his sister. He looked at Talia. She was fighting. Her small hands clenched. She was his blood. She was the last of his wife. Kale's words returned. Your grief makes you weak. No, Nakai thought. It makes me strong. He made his decision. It was a choice that no Apache chief had ever made. He would trust a white woman's medicine. He would trust Naleen. You, he said to Tiza, the old woman. Bar the entrance. Let no one in. He turned to Elizabeth. You are coming with me. What? She recoiled. You know the plant. You know the spot. We go together. But the fighting. Thorn. Kale. Kale will slow them. But they will not expect me to be in the canyon. They will expect me to be here. We will move like ghosts. Now, come. Before Elizabeth could argue, he grabbed his knife, his rifle, and pulled her out of the wickiup, leaving his daughter in the care of Tiza. They slipped into the shadows, moving toward the gunfire that had just begun to echo from the lower pass. The siege was on. Elias Thorn, his face a grim mask of vengeance, dismounted at the canyon mouth. Rocks, hurled by Kale's men, crashed down, spooking the horses. They're trapped! Thorn yelled to his men, a dozen ranchers armed to the teeth. They're in the box canyon. The woman's either dead or in that camp. We go in, we burn 'em out, and we get her back. Dead or alive. No survivors. He chambered a round into his Winchester. Move! His men fanned out, taking cover behind rocks, firing up at Kale's position. Bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls, the sound of the white man's war filling the Apache's home, and far below them, moving through the thick brush along the canyon floor, two shadows ran toward the sound of the spring, unseen by either side. The canyon floor was a nightmare of shifting shadows and treacherous scree. Every crackle of a twig under Elizabeth's boot felt like a cannon shot. Nakai moved ahead of her, a wraith in the moonlight. He seemed to flow over the terrain, never making a sound, his head constantly turning, sniffing the air like a wolf. Elizabeth, her lungs burning, struggled to keep up. Her world, the civilized world of cabins and medicine, had fallen away. She was Naleen again, a terrified child running through the dark, trusting the warrior in front of her. The sporadic crack of rifles from the ridge above them was a terrifying drumbeat. Kale was doing his job. He was drawing Thorn's fire, pinning the posse down. But it wouldn't last. They reached the spring. It was a small oasis, a cluster of cottonwoods and lush greenery hidden in a crease of the canyon. And there, growing thick and pale in the moonlight, was the chill guy, the white bear clover. There, Elizabeth whispered, scrambling toward it. She began tearing it from the ground, roots and all, stuffing the precious pungent leaves into her bag. Nakai stood guard, his rifle up, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon above. He saw the muzzle flashes. He saw Thorn's men, silhouetted against the sky, slowly advancing, using the rocks for cover. Kyle was being outflanked. "Enough," Nakai commanded. "We have enough. Just one more. Now." He grabbed her, pulling her back into the shadows of the cottonwoods. And not a moment too soon. A figure appeared on the ridge directly above the spring. It wasn't one of Kale's men. It was a rancher, one of Thorn's scouts, who had circled wide. He looked down, peering into the darkness. Elizabeth froze. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. Nakai slowly, silently, raised his rifle. He was invisible in the shadow of a large boulder. His aim was true. It was an easy shot. Elizabeth saw his finger tighten on the trigger. "No," she whispered, a desperate tiny sound. Nakai paused, his head turning to her, his eyes questioning. "The sound," she whispered. "They will all come. We will be trapped." He hesitated. She was right. A shot would pinpoint their location, trapping them between Thorn's main force and this new scout. He slowly lowered the rifle. He signaled to her, "Stay." He put the rifle down. He drew his knife. Elizabeth watched, her hand over her mouth, as Nakai began to climb the sheer rock face, moving like a spider. The rancher above was still peering down, unaware. Nakai was silent. He reached the ledge, grabbed the man from behind, and pulled him over. There was a single, muffled grunt, a brief struggle, and then silence. Nakai reappeared, wiping his blade on his breechcloth. He had saved them, but the cost was a man's life. Elizabeth felt sick. "We go," Nakai said, his voice hard. The moment of his past, of Naleen, was gone. This was the chief. They scrambled back up the canyon, the precious herbs clutched in Elizabeth's bag. As they neared the camp, the sounds of the battle changed. The gunfire was closer, more frantic, and it was coming from inside the camp. Kale. They burst into the clearing to see a scene of chaos. Kale, his face streaked with blood from a grazing bullet wound, had abandoned his post. Driven by his rage and the belief that Nakai had deserted them, he had led his men in a full-blown charge down into the camp, meeting Thorn's advancing force head-on. It was a massacre. Kale's warriors were fighting with the desperation of trapped animals, but Thorn's men had the superior numbers and the better ground. "Kale!" Nakai bellowed, his voice thick with fury. His second-in-command had defied his order, and in doing so, had signed his own death warrant and that of his men. Kyle heard his chief. He was locked in hand-to-hand combat with a burly rancher. He threw the man off, his chest heaving. He saw Nakai, and standing next to him, the white woman. "Traitor!" Kale screamed, his voice breaking with betrayal. You ran with her and left us to die." "I went for the medicine, you fool," Nakai roared back. "Lies! You are no chief. You are a Pindalikai's dog." In his blind rage, Kale did the unthinkable. He raised his rifle, not at the ranchers who were bearing down on him, but at Nakai. And at Elizabeth. He fired. Everything slowed. Elizabeth saw the flash. Nakai, with a speed that defied physics, shoved her to the ground, taking the bullet himself. It struck his shoulder, spinning him around. He staggered, but did not fall. The pain a white-hot explosion. Kyle, stunned by his own action, stood frozen for a half-second. It was all the time Elias Thorne needed. Thorne, who had been advancing on the wiki-ups, saw Kale fire at the white woman he had come to rescue. He raised his Winchester. "Traitorous savage!" Thorne yelled, and fired 3 times. The bullet struck Kale in the chest. The big warrior looked down, a look of profound surprise on his face, before collapsing into the dust. The battle stopped. The remaining Apache warriors, seeing Kale fall, threw down their weapons. The ranchers, seeing their leader victorious, lowered their rifles. Elias Thorne stood in the center of the camp, breathing heavily, his rifle smoking. His eyes scanned the carnage. His men moved in, kicking weapons away, grabbing the surviving warriors. Thorne looked at Nakai, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of agony and rage. "Chief Nakai," Thorne said, spitting the name, "your reign is over." He then saw Elizabeth, who was scrambling to her feet, her bag of herbs clutched in her hand. "Mrs. Stanton," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "Are you all right? Did this beast—" He nudged Kale's body with his boot. "Harm you?" He expected her to run to him, to thank him for her rescue. But Elizabeth did not move. She looked at the dead warriors. She looked at Kale's body. She looked at Nakai, bleeding. And then she ran. She ran right past Elias Thorne, ignoring him completely. She ran to the wiki-up, ripped open the flap, and disappeared inside. Thorne and his men stood in stunned silence. "What in God's name?" Thorne muttered. He motioned to 2 of his men. "Find out what she's doing." He walked over to Nakai, who was now on one knee, and pressed the hot barrel of his Winchester to the chief's head. "It's over, Apache," Thorne growled. "You're all going to San Carlos, in chains, or in boxes." Nakai just glared at him, the blood dripping from his arm. He didn't care about the rifle. He was listening. From inside the wiki-up, he could hear a new sound, the sound of vigorous grinding, of water being poured. And then, a child's hacking cough. He had the medicine. She was with Talia. He had kept his promise. Now, he just had to wait. Elias Thorne was a man of certainty. He was certain that the Apache were godless savages, that they had murdered his family, and that Elizabeth Stanton was their victim. Now, all his certainties were unraveling. The 2 men he'd sent to the wiki-up stumbled back out, their faces pale and confused. "Boss," one of them, a young cowboy named Peter, stammered. You gotta see this." "What is it, son? Did they kill her?" Thorne growled, shoving Nakai toward the wiki-up. "No, sir. She ain't dead. Well, just see." Thorne, his suspicion warring with his confusion, shoved the wiki-up flap aside and stepped in, his rifle ready. The scene that greeted him was the one that had shocked Nakai hours before, but now it was compounded by a dozen impossible details. The small space was lit by a single, guttering flame. In the center, Elizabeth Stanton, the woman he'd come to rescue, was on her knees. She was holding the head of a small, sick Apache girl. The child was choking, and Elizabeth was gently, firmly, forcing a dark, pungent-smelling liquid into her mouth. "That's it," Elizabeth was murmuring, her voice a strange mix of English and Apache. "Breathe, Talia. Breathe it in. Good girl. Njonago. Good." The child coughed, a deep rattling sound, and then she took a clear, deep breath. The whistling sound in her lungs was gone. Thorne stared, his mind unable to compute. "Mrs. Stanton, what are you doing?" Elizabeth looked up, her face streaked with tears, dirt, and the green-black herbal paste. Her eyes were fierce, like a mother bear's. "What does it look like, Elias?" she snapped, her voice raw. "I'm saving her life." "But it's a—" he gestured. "It's an Apache. A savage." Nakai, bleeding heavily, was pushed into the wickiup behind him. He saw his daughter. He saw her eyes, no longer glassy with fever, but clear. He saw her chest rise and fall with a clean breath. "She is not a savage," Elizabeth said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She is a child. Her name is Talia, and she is burning with the same fever that took your Sarah." The name hit Thorne like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face draining of all color. Sarah, his own daughter. He hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in 5 years. Don't you say her name," he whispered, his rifle trembling. "Why not?" Elizabeth pressed, standing up, placing herself between Thorne and the child. "Because she was white? Because she was yours? Does that make her life worth more than this one? Is that what John died for? Is that what you killed all those men out there for?" They are animals," Thorne yelled, but his voice was cracking. "They killed her. They killed my wife." "He didn't," Elizabeth said, jabbing a finger toward Nakai. "He didn't. It was the Mescalero. You know it, but it's easier to hate them all, isn't it? It's easier to kill than to see this." She pointed to the girl. "Look at her, Elias. She's just a child, like Sarah." Thorne looked at the small girl on the pallet. He saw the dark hair, the small face, the vulnerable, thin body. And for a second, it was Sarah. It was his daughter, burning with the fever that had swept their homestead. He remembered his own helplessness, the same desperation he now saw in the wounded chief's eyes. His entire world, built on a foundation of righteous hatred, fractured. Nakai, watching this, saw the moment the man broke. He, too, had used his daughter's memory to justify his hatred. He and Thorne were two sides of the same bloody coin. Nakai spoke, his voice thick with pain, but clear. He spoke in broken English, for Thorne. "My wife," he grunted, clutching his shoulder. "Same. Sickness. 3. Winter. Gone." Thorne looked from Nakai to Elizabeth and back to the child. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. He slowly, agonizingly, lowered it until the barrel touched the dirt floor. The shock, for both men, was complete. It wasn't the shock of a white woman helping an Apache. It was the shock of recognition, the shock of shared grief. Elizabeth, seeing the truce in his eyes, tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat. She walked past Thorne, past his rifle, and went to Nakai. She pressed the cloth hard against his bleeding shoulder. Nakai flinched, but he looked at her. He saw Naleen, his sister. "Your medicine is strong," he whispered in Apache. "Our medicine," she corrected, giving him a small, watery smile. "Our mother's medicine." Thorne watched this, lost. What do we do now? He asked, his voice that of a lost man. Nakai looked at the bodies of his warriors outside. He looked at the wounded Kyle, who had been brought in and lay dying in the corner. He looked at his daughter, who was finally, blessedly, asleep. You, take your dead, Nakai said to Thorn. And you, go. And you? Thorn asked. We will go to the high mountains, or to San Carlos. The fight, it is over. Kale. He was the last of the war. Thorn nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He backed out of the wiki-up. Peters, he yelled, his voice hoarse. Get the men. We're leaving. Take our dead. Leave theirs. The ranchers, confused but obedient, gathered their fallen and retreated down the canyon, leaving the Apache to their grief. An hour later, as the first hint of dawn painted the sky, Nakai stood at the edge of the clearing. His arm was tightly bound. Elizabeth was beside him. Talia was wrapped in a blanket, alive, sleeping in the arms of Tiza. Nakai looked at Elizabeth. He had no words, in English or Apache, for what had happened. He had lost his best warrior, his home, and his war. But he had saved his daughter, and he had found his sister. He reached up with his good hand and pulled the turquoise pendant from around his neck, the one that had been his wife's and his mother's before that. He pressed it into Elizabeth's hand. This belongs to Naline, he said. She is a warrior, a healer, a bridge. Elizabeth closed her hand around the warm stone. Where will you go, Nakai? Agent Clum at San Carlos, Nakai said, his voice heavy. He is an honest man, maybe. It is time. The old way, it is gone. Kale proved that. The fighting is done. It doesn't have to be, she said. My husband. He spoke of land in the north. Protected. For the free Apache. Maybe. Nakai smiled. A rare, sad expression. You are still a dreamer, Naline. But you are a Baden-Kohi dreamer. Go home, Elizabeth Stanton. Be safe. Thorn. He will not bother you now. You have shamed him with life. Elizabeth nodded, tears in her eyes. She turned and walked away, back toward her cabin, the turquoise clutched in her hand. Nakai watched her go until she was a small speck in the growing light. He then turned back to his people, a chief with a wounded arm, a sleeping daughter, and an uncertain future. He was a man who had been shattered by a shock, not of hatred, but of a shared humanity, and a past that had returned, not to haunt him, but to save him. The West was not won with just bullets and steel. It was a battle of hearts, of old wounds, and of impossible choices. Nakai, Elias Thorne, and Elizabeth Stanton were all trapped by their past, until one sick child and one brave woman forced them to see the truth. The greatest shock wasn't the knife at the throat. It was the moment they recognized their shared humanity in the eyes of their sworn enemy. What happened to them? Did Nakai find peace at San Carlos? Did Elizabeth's courage build a bridge? Or was it swallowed by the frontier? The history books don't tell their story, but we do. If this story of the Old West moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful drama, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories and hidden histories. Let us know in the comments. What part of Elizabeth's sacrifice or Nakai's choice hit you the hardest? We read everyone. Thanks for listening.